You are alone at home. No TV, no music, just the low hum of the fridge and the ticking of a clock. You scroll your phone when, suddenly, you hear it. Someone says your name, quiet, close, as if they are standing in the hallway. Your body reacts before your thoughts do. Heart jumps, muscles tense. You listen. Nothing. The apartment is empty. 10 minutes later, it happens again. A whisper, a half word. Too clear to be just the building. Too vague to prove anything. Most explanations treat that voice as something coming from outside you. In one family, it will be a shaitan, testing your faith. In another, the spirit of an ancestor. In a third, a warning sign that your mind is not okay. Almost nobody tells you the more unsettling version. Your brain can create a perfectly real feeling voice in a completely healthy person, with no ghost, no demon, and no mental illness involved. The first pattern is simple: hearing your own name. A woman in her 20s lives alone. Once or twice a week, usually late at night, she hears a soft "hey" or her name from the hallway. Never a full sentence, just enough to make her turn her head. She checks the rooms, looks through the peephole, even turns appliances off to get rid of background noise. The voice keeps returning on random nights, especially when she is exhausted. Over time, she builds a story around it. Maybe the apartment is not empty. Maybe something lives here. The story scares her, but at least it gives the feeling a shape. The second pattern appears after loss. A man's father dies. For years, his father's cough meant he's in the next room. Two short, rough sounds, always paired. Weeks after the funeral, while making tea, the man hears exactly that two-step cough from the living room. Later, half asleep on the couch, he hears his father mutter a familiar complaint. Each time, the sound is so clean that, for 1 second, his brain believes the impossible. The dead have returned. His family calls it a sign, a comfort. But a part of him is more frightened by the other option, that his own brain can mimic his father better than any recording ever could. The third pattern is less personal but just as unnerving: the phantom TV in the other room. You are home alone and it sounds like someone, somewhere in the apartment, is talking with the volume turned low. Not clear sentences, but the texture of speech. Rises and falls, bursts and pauses, as if a conversation is happening just beyond the wall. When you lean in and try to catch the words, they fall apart into random noise. When you stop paying attention, the voices return. The house feels occupied, even though you know every door is locked. On the surface, these stories look different. A name, a dead parent, anonymous murmurs. Underneath, they share the same ingredients: a quiet but not silent environment. A brain under strain, tired, stressed, lonely, grieving. And a constant background of weak, messy sounds. Pipes expanding, traffic filtered through concrete, the fridge, the building settling, the blood in your own ears. Your auditory system receives fragments, not finished signals, and your brain hates fragments. Your ears turn vibrations into electrical impulses. Those signals travel up to the auditory cortex, the patch of brain on the side of your head that builds the experience of, "I heard something." But that cortex is not a neutral microphone. It is a pattern matcher. Every new sound is compared against a library of templates: footsteps, doors, speech, your name, the voices of people who matter to you. When the incoming signal is strong and clean, the match is obvious. When the signal is faint and distorted, the brain has to guess. And evolution taught it to guess aggressively. Better to mistake a random creak for a voice than to miss a real person moving in your space. Your own name is the most powerful template of all. From childhood, it has been the word that demands your attention fastest. Your brain is tuned to detect it through layers of noise, what psychologists call the cocktail party effect. In a silent apartment, the same mechanism runs on the hiss of pipes or the thump of a neighbor dropping something upstairs. If a sound's rhythm and pitch even vaguely fit the contour of your name, the detector snaps to it. Internally, the brain labels the noise, "That was my name," and that label is what you consciously experience. The raw sound in the room was a vague thud. The name was your brain's best guess painted over it.
With a dead father, the guess comes from memory. The sound of his cough, his footsteps, his favorite phrases, all live as detailed patterns in the son's brain. While the father was alive, those patterns were driven by real input. After his death, the patterns remain, waiting. Returning to the same kitchen, standing in the same spot, performing the same small rituals, primes those networks. A random creak in the floor or cough from a neighbor hits a brain already expecting, "This is where my father used to be." Instead of matching it to building noise, the system reaches for the most emotional template it has. When that network fires, the brain does not play a weak creak. It plays back a full, high-resolution recording of his father's cough over the top of it. To the son, it feels exactly like the past cutting into the present. His emotion is real. The sound is real. The source is not. The phantom TV follows the same rule, but with less personal content. Human speech has a very specific acoustic shape, flowing up and down in volume and pitch, chopped into syllables, with pauses and bursts. So does random noise, if you listen long enough. Distant traffic, water in pipes, the rumble of a building structure all contain tiny fluctuations that occasionally line up in a speech-like rhythm. Your early auditory system answers a simple question: could this be a voice? Not, is this a voice? In a quiet room, alone and slightly on edge, that system becomes overprotective and says yes far more often than no. You feel someone is talking, but when you try to decode the words, the signal collapses because there were never any words to begin with. Under all three experiences runs the same ancient logic. For most of human history, being alone in the dark was dangerous. A solitary human without a group was easy prey. For most of human history, being alone in the dark was dangerous. A human separated from the group had to treat every unclear sound as a potential threat. The brains that survived were the ones that turned rustling leaves into footsteps and distant cracks into approaching predators. That bias did not disappear just because you now live in a concrete box with Wi-Fi. Your auditory system is still tuned for the worst-case scenario. So when you sit in a quiet apartment and your brain suddenly serves you a whisper, a familiar cough, or the texture of voices in the next room, it is not revealing a hidden spirit world. It is running the same survival algorithm that kept your ancestors alive. Detect patterns early, even if you're wrong. A vague noise plus a brain full of memories and expectations equals a voice. The sound feels external, the fear feels justified, and yet the entire experience was assembled inside your skull from scraps of real noise and stored patterns. That is the core of part 1. Hearing a voice when you are alone does not mean you are haunted, and does not automatically mean you are losing your mind. It means your brain is over-solving a problem it was never updated for, trying to guard you from predators in a world where the loudest thing at night is your refrigerator. The distance between hearing your name once a week and hearing voices every hour is thinner than you think. It is not a different system. It is the same system running at different levels of intensity. The woman who hears a whisper in the hallway and the person diagnosed with auditory hallucinations are both experiencing the same core event, the brain generating sound internally and presenting it as external. What separates them is not the mechanism, it is control. It is whether the brain still knows the difference. Start with a fact that most people find disturbing. You have an internal voice. Right now, as you read this, you are hearing these words inside your head. That voice is not abstract. It is being produced by the same language areas of your brain that produce speech, and it activates parts of your auditory cortex the same way external sound does. If you were in an MRI machine while silently reading, scientists would see activity in regions tied to hearing, even though your ears are picking up nothing. Your brain is generating auditory experience without external input. This happens constantly. When you think in words, when you rehearse a conversation, when you replay a song in your head, you are hallucinating sound. The only reason you do not call it a hallucination is that another part of your brain tags it as self-generated. It marks the activity with a label. This is me thinking, not someone speaking to me. That tagging system is not perfect. It works most of the time, but it can slip. Sleep deprivation weakens it. After just one night of poor sleep, people report that their internal voice feels louder, more intrusive, harder to control. Thoughts start feeling like they are being pushed into the mind rather than generated by it. Stay awake long enough, and the boundary dissolves almost completely. People in extreme sleep deprivation hear full sentences, music, conversations, commands. They know logically that no one is in the room, but the experience is identical to hearing a real voice. The sound has location, tone, clarity. It does not feel like imagination. It feels like perception.
The same breakdown happens in sensory deprivation. When the brain stops receiving external input, it begins generating its own. Studies of people in isolation tanks or solitary confinement show that within hours, the brain invents stimuli to fill the void. Voices, footsteps, music. These are not going crazy. They are the brain doing what it always does, building a model of the world. except now it has no external data to correct the model, so the model runs wild. It hallucinates reality because reality has gone silent, and the brain cannot tolerate silence. It would rather fill the void with invented sound than sit in uncertainty. Grief does something similar, but slower and more targeted. When someone you love dies, their voice does not leave your brain immediately. It is stored as a high-resolution pattern, the exact pitch, rhythm, texture. While they were alive, that pattern was triggered by their actual voice reaching your ears. After they die, the trigger is gone, but the pattern remains, and it can fire spontaneously. Returning to a familiar place, performing a familiar action, encountering a familiar smell, all of that can prime the network. Then a weak external sound, a cough from a neighbor, a shuffle from the floor above, lands on a brain already primed with, "My father used to be here." The weak signal gets amplified through the stored memory, and what you consciously hear is not the creak or the cough, it is your father's voice, played back at full volume, layered over reality. This is called a bereavement hallucination, and it is considered completely normal in the first few months after a loss. Studies show that between 30 and 60% of grieving people report hearing, seeing, or feeling the presence of the deceased. The experience is not a sign of pathology, it is the brain trying to hold on. Memory networks that were built over years do not shut down overnight just because the external source is gone. They linger, they fire, they intrude. And because those networks are tied to deep emotion, the brain has a hard time tagging them as just memory. They feel too real, too present, too immediate. The voice is not imagined, it is remembered so vividly that it crosses the threshold into perception. Now add stress and isolation to the mix. Both increase the likelihood that your brain will misattribute internal activity as external. Stress puts the nervous system into a state of hypervigilance. You become more reactive to sound, more sensitive to ambiguous signals, more likely to interpret noise as threat. Isolation removes the external feedback that usually keeps your perception grounded. When you live alone, there is no one to say, "I didn't hear anything," which means your brain's guesses go unchallenged. Over weeks and months, the threshold drops. Sounds that you would have dismissed as the building start triggering the response. That was a voice. And because the response keeps happening, your brain begins treating it as reliable information rather than a false alarm. This is where the line between normal and clinical starts to blur. If you hear a voice once a month, dismiss it and move on. That is well within the normal range of human experience. If you hear it twice a week and it bothers you but does not interfere with your life, that is still normal. If you start hearing voices multiple times a day, if they carry content, commands, insults, commentary, if they feel impossible to ignore, and if you lose the ability to say, "That was probably nothing," then you have crossed into a space where the system is no longer functioning adaptively. You are still using the same auditory cortex, the same pattern matching software, the same tagging system, but now the system is firing too often, tagging too much activity as external, and your conscious mind cannot override it. The difference between hearing voices sometimes and hearing voices as a symptom is not the presence of the voice, it is whether you retain the ability to reality test it. Can you still think, "That sounded like my name, but no one is here, so it was probably the pipes"? If yes, you are fine. If no, if the voice insists on being real, if it argues with you, if it feels like it has agency and intention, that is when it stops being a quirk of perception and starts being a clinical concern. And the terrifying part is that the shift is gradual. People do not wake up one day hearing full conversations. They start with a whisper here, a word there, and over months or years, the volume and frequency creep up. What pushes someone from one side of that line to the other? Biology plays a role. People with certain genetic vulnerabilities, people with a history of trauma, people with disruptions in dopamine regulation, all are at higher risk. But even in a completely healthy brain, enough environmental pressure can tip the balance. Chronic sleep deprivation plus social isolation plus prolonged stress equals a brain that is running its auditory prediction system in overdrive with no external correction. It starts hearing patterns everywhere. And once it locks onto a pattern, once it decides that noise is a voice, it becomes very hard to dislodge that interpretation. The brain has committed. It has built a model where voices exist in the environment, and now every new ambiguous sound gets fed into that model.
This is why people in extreme situations, prisoners in solitary, sailors alone at sea, scientists in Antarctic research stations, report hearing voices, music, entire conversations, even though they know, intellectually, that no one is there. Their brains are not broken, they are overcompensating. The environment has become so empty that the brain's prediction engine has nothing to work with, so it starts feeding on itself. It replays stored sounds, generates new combinations, projects them outward. The person experiences this as external because the brain is using the exact same circuits it uses for real external sound. There is no "this is fake" channel. There is only sound detected, and the brain has decided the source is out there, not in here. Now the final, most uncomfortable question. If your brain can generate a voice so convincing that you cannot distinguish it from reality, if the only thing separating you from chronic auditory hallucinations is a tagging system that can fail under pressure, then what does that say about all of your other perceptions? You trust your senses. You trust that what you see, hear, and feel is real. But your senses are not cameras and microphones passively recording the world. They are prediction engines, constantly guessing what is out there based on fragments of input and a lifetime of stored patterns. Most of the time, the guesses are accurate, but they are still guessing. And when the system misfires, when it predicts a voice that is not there, you do not experience it as a mistake. You experience it as reality. This is the part where some people retreat into denial. Okay, sure, I hear my name sometimes when I am tired, but that is not the same as a hallucination. Except it is. The only difference is intensity and frequency. You are hallucinating a small amount. Someone with schizophrenia is hallucinating a large amount. Same process, same brain regions, same tagging failure. The distinction is not binary, sane versus insane, real versus fake. It is a spectrum, and you are on that spectrum. Everyone is. The question is not, am I the kind of person who hallucinates? The question is, how often, and can I still correct for it? So when you are alone tonight and you hear that soft voice in the other room, when you freeze and strain to listen and find nothing, you now know what happened. Your brain detected a weak, ambiguous sound. It ran that sound through its library of important patterns. It found a match, or close enough, and labeled it voice. That label became your experience. The sound was real. The interpretation was invented. And the only reason you are not hearing voices all the time is that for now, your brain still has enough external input and internal stability to keep the guessing within a reasonable range. But the machinery is always running. The threshold is always shifting. And the line between normal person who hears things sometimes and person who hears things all the time is not a wall. It is a slope. And you are standing on it.